All right, guys, if you want to, if everybody can start to get in their seats, 9:30, we're going to kick off. John, I see you're on. You want to say hello and get us going?
Absolutely, yep. So thanks very much, Chris, for being in the room, and great to have a co-chair at last. So hi everybody. Hey Ori, see you waving. Thank you. Yeah, good. So let's get cracking. Give it a slide, please. So as ever, it's the end of the week. I'm sure you've seen this many times, but the note well applies just as much in SCITT as every other group. So please do make sure that you conduct yourself in an appropriate fashion with respect to patents and IPR and submissions that you make in this meeting. Next slide, please. And of course, also in the way that you interact with everybody. This is typically a pretty lively mic type meeting, and everybody's usually pretty cool, but just a reminder, if somebody says something you don't like, then debate the point, not the person, and so on, and generally just be excellent to each other. If you do have an issue with anything that happens either in this meeting or of course at IETF at all, you can of course contact us as chairs or any of the other officials of the IETF and report that, and I'm sure we'll take it seriously and get it sorted out. So slide, please. So everybody, I think again it's the end of the week. You must know this by now, but importantly, if you don't for whatever reason sign in using the on-site tool, please do scan the code for the blue sheets. We need to know who's attended. It's useful for all kinds of reasons. And so, yeah, if you sign in with the on-site tool, that'll make it easy because you just get automatically registered. But if you can't or don't want to do that for whatever reason, please do just scan the blue sheet on your way out. Slide. Here are the resources. I think we've got those. Let's skip this slide, please. So note taking, the usual thing, we need to take good, high quality and complete notes from these meetings. I will be trying to do that, but I am speaking for a little bit of this meeting, and it's pretty hard for one person to capture everything. So are there any volunteers in the room to take? AJ, I see you in the queue. Recognize AJ Stein.
Steve raised his hand as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, no, that'll be great. So if you can get on the hedge doc, and I'll see you there. That'll be fantastic. Thank you. Slide, please. Okay, so here's the agenda for today. We have the welcome and introduction, which we've just completed in a bit under 5 minutes. So this is the agenda as posted, but just to give an idea of what's coming. So a bit of an overview, mostly for newer folks, but we've got some updated diagrams and communications tools that Steve's going to go through, which are quite nice. Ori done a very good job of pushing the documents along, give us a bit of an update on the official status of those. And Henk is going to walk us through all of the PRs and such that we've had. It's been a lot of work in between 118 and 119, so it'll be good to go through those. I'll talk a bit about Scrappy, which was introduced at 118. And then talk through the hackathon as ever, which has had some pretty nice results. A bit different this time to the last 2 or 3, so also a good thing. So that's it, and then we'll take AOB at the end. So I think that's a good time to hand over to Steve, unless Roman actually wants to say something at the mic.
Hi, everyone. So this is Roman Janilio, I guess SCITT AD Emeritus. So I wanted to come up the mic for a couple of thank yous. First, I wanted to introduce everyone to your new incoming AD, Deb Cooley, who is kind of online. You should be very happy you're going to have now someone much better than me, much more knowledgeable kind of in the area, and she's going to help you kind of tremendously to continue to advance that work. And then the other introductions I want to say is, again, an outgoing thank you to Hannes, who helped get us started from the very beginning through the BOFs and kind of ran us for the first year. And I wanted to welcome our incoming working group chair, Chris Inacio. Thank you for your willingness to serve.
Thanks, everybody.
And John, thanks for holding the steady hand through all these transitions to continue the velocity of the work. Yes, steady hand, even though it's Friday. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Roman.
Hello, thank you. So, oh yeah, great. So hello, I'm Steve Lasker with Data Trails. I'm going to talk about what we've been doing with SCITT. So first of all, when we started SCITT, we made a statement, which we'll talk about, but basically the supply chain, integrity, transparency, and trust. Keywords will define a set of interoperable building blocks, the focus on interoperable, that will allow implementations to build integrity and accountability into software, supply chains, and to help ensure trustworthy operations. So there's a couple of key pieces in that. Interoperable, that was one of the main pieces. Is there's a bunch of these standards already evolving, already existing. How do they interoperate with each other? What are those building blocks that interoperate with each other? And integrity and accountability. Well, integrity is effectively, does it changed? Can somebody go mess with it over time? And if somebody does, we want to know about it, right? We can't prove that something doesn't change, but we can prove that if it was changed, we know that this is what it was at a certain time. Accountability is effectively who made those statements. Are they accountable for those making those statements? Are those statements accurate? That's not the point. The point is who made the statement and when did they make them? The software part was a scoping conversation. When we started SCITT, there was a lot of interest in hardware scenarios as well. We agreed we'd start with software, get that one done, and then come and add hardware as needed. And then the trustworthy operation is not necessarily, again, that everybody's making accurate information. Are they coming back and fixing the information if there's a problem with it over time? Are they accountable for the statements they make and new statements they can make around something as they learn more information? So if I think about oh, that's interesting. There's no animation. This became a PDF. Ah, yes. Okay. All right, fine. It was built to know that the end result was going to happen that way anyway.
You and John tell me.
It's okay. It's okay. So if I think about this, we think about identity, and identity is making a statement about an artifact. What the identity is and how it's represented is not part of SCITT. We started with a little more focus on it, and that became the SPICE working group. So an identity is making a statement. Well, what are the types of statements somebody can make? Again, not the charter of SCITT. We want to say that payloads are opaque. Doesn't matter whether it's an SBOM, whether it's a contract, whether it's a C2PA manifest, if it's a statement about the weather, that content type is opaque to SCITT. We're just going to make sure that the statements you're making by a certain identity. And then about an artifact. What is an artifact? Could be a binary, could be the weather, could be, or city. It could be a statement about the city of weather. It could be anything. There's an identifier for the artifact. That's all that matters in SCITT. It's the correlation of the three of those things together. The statements are stored in existing storage systems. Even the storage systems aren't part of SCITT. You might already have a place you're storing this content. We just want to make sure that an issuer can make a statement about that content at a particular point in time, and that gets packaged into an envelope and then registered with the transparency service. So it's packaged up, submitted, and then a transparency service will evaluate the issuer It doesn't evaluate the content. If I, in the United States, if the way notaries work is I go and I want to have a document notarized that I am making that statement. I have to prove my identity. That notary doesn't look to know if the contract is valid. They're just proving that I am making that statement about an artifact. Later on, if that goes to court, the court will argue the validity of the contract, but they won't be arguing the validity of the identity. That was already proven at that point in time. So it gets registered, and then a receipt is produced. The receipt proves that that statement was made by that issuer at that time. Doesn't mean the statement is accurate, just means the statement was made. Now, that statement is the correlation of the three is really important. I make a statement that the weather in Brisbane is awesome. The artifact is Brisbane. I am the issuer. The statement is the weather is awesome. I come from Seattle. The weather, this is actually pretty good that it's a little warmer. So somebody like, wow, he must really like it because it's known to be hot there. Somebody else might think the weather is way too cold here, right? So the reference is the identity is making the statement. If I go to the internet and look for some information, you want to look at the source of that information to know if you want to trust that source. So that's kind of key to that trifecta of information that comes back. Now, so the receipt is produced. I made that statement at that time. Verifiers, what we call relying parties, a verifier and auditor, can come back and say, what statements were made about this artifact? What were the receipts? What was the receipt for this statement at that time? So you can go back to it and get that information as well. So it's really good because I could also say, what were the statements made about Brisbane? Brisbane being the artifact. Multiple issuers have made statements because there's a subject that identifies the artifact. So, okay, it's very different to see this built out already. Okay, so if we look at this more closely and we just focus on the top right corner, an issuer is the identity, is making statements about the artifact. That gets caught up in the CWT claims. So imagine just those two blue lines on the right are now drawn. An issuer is making a statement about an artifact. The artifact has an identifier, which is captured in the issuer. What is the identity type? Don't care. Not part of SCITT. You define an identifier, and that's how you can correlate it with your artifact. Issuer types, again, we're not trying to be the answers for all identity types. We'll look at SPICE to come out with that. But we capture that as an issuer. Or, yeah, like the pressure, Rory. See the cringe. That information is now captured in the protected header. And if you look at that, the CWT claim is the only required property in the CWT header. And the others are optional based on the type of identity you're using. We've been discussing how to be more prescriptive around when to use which, because having all optional makes it a little confusing. We'll talk about that in the hackathon output. That all gets captured up into an envelope, and you can see these captured together, and the payload is put into the envelope. The payload itself, again, we're not being storage. It's just the payload. The payload could be a pointer to where that is already stored, a detached payload. That's just another content type. We do capture the content type in the protected header, so you can figure out what are these SBOMs, are these contracts, are these in toto attestations. It doesn't matter. That's just, it's a hint to help you figure out what that content type is of the statement. So that's basically it. All of that gets packaged up. You've got a cozy sign one envelope that gets submitted to the transparency service. And now issuers can make statements about artifacts. You can prove when those statements were made. Doesn't mean they're true. It doesn't mean that they were, it just means that that's what was made at that time. That issuer could come back and say, hey, I learned something new about that. So now on Wednesday, here's my statement around that same artifact. So you can get the collection of statements for that subject, that artifact as well. So that's what I got for now. I think, let's see. Ori, you're up next for the documents.
There we go. Right. So we have unlike most software supply chains, we have a fairly simple dependency graph. Our architecture is the primary document, and it is related to our use cases and to the Scrappy API. So, we started work on use cases as soon as the working group was chartered, and we've used those use cases to kind of feel out the relationship between the signed statement and the receipts, and how many, multiple receipts. So use cases have helped us evolve the architecture. They've been doing their job. And the architecture is getting to the point where we're feeling pretty good about it. So now we're starting to focus on this RESTful API for interacting with a transparency service. I want to say on Scrappy and this RESTful API, this is just one way that we've discussed interacting with a transparency service. So the core protocol message envelopes are really the focus of SCITT. The signed statement, the receipt, and that they're a combination, potentially a signed statement with multiple receipts from multiple independent transparency services. We call that a transparent statement. And those are all in the architecture. This Scrappy REST API is just a simple HTTP interface. It's one way for you to submit a signed statement and retrieve a receipt. And then we have a series of optional endpoints that we're looking at that are kind of adjacent to the core SCITT operating functions that we think are helpful to explain issues regarding looking up identifiers that are related to the signed statement, issues regarding retrieving receipts over time, those kinds of details. That's basically it. Any questions? I guess one additional comment I'll make is that receipts are, effectively a COSI structure. And so there is a document that I presented in the COSI working group called COSI Receipts. And that's the sort of envelope layer construction that the architecture relies on. So technically, there's a ... to the COSI working group draft from the architecture, because our SCITT architecture takes a normative dependency on COSI Receipts.
So, Ori, just as a chair's comment, what's the status of COSI Receipts?
Yeah. So in this IETF presentation on COSI Receipts, I noted I think the document's looking pretty good. It's almost ready for working group last call, but of course that's for the chairs of the COSI working group to address. There's one substantive issue that's still kind of, I think, holding it up, and that's the definition of the consistency proof. So we have an issue filed for that in the COSI working group work item. And the COSI chairs were wise enough to ask for reviewers to look at that issue of consistency proofs. And so I would like it if you might also call for additional reviews of the consistency proof, so that we can ensure that COSI Receipts document is progressed at some point. I can provide a link in the chat and in the minutes for folks who might want to review it. The thing that it's sort of unfortunate, SCITT only relies on the inclusion proof today. So in SCITT architecture, we've not really looked at the utility of the consistency proof, because most of the time we're thinking about proving that a signed statement is in a transparency log, not necessarily proving properties of the transparency log, such as a append-only property or privacy properties from like VRF indexing and Merkle trees, or other fancier stuff. So the COSI Receipts document has advanced capabilities, and the one that SCITT's really using is the inclusion proof, but the consistency proof is kind of holding the document back.
Thanks.
Yaron.
Yaron Chef, a quick clarifying question. Is the working group only about envelopes and APIs, or is the semantics of the statements also in scope?
It's a great question. The semantics of the statements are not really in scope. We do have a media type extension point where we kind of defer a lot of interpreting the details of a given signed statement. So if you see in a signed statement, this is an SPDX, JSON SBOM, then you know from that media type some of the semantics of the payload itself. However, we do have the issuer and subject claims in our envelopes, which are important to understand in the context of the supply chain. In the context of understanding who issued a receipt or who issued a signed statement.
Thank you.
All right. I'm gonna advance. Hank, you're up.
I will also try this again. Succeed. Oh. Smug smile. Hi, this is Hank. Oh, that's my monitor. Wonderful. So this we call this slide a recap slide because we were talking about some of the work we've done since IETF 118. Next slide, please. Also, I have a clicker.
You do? It's
Oh,
right
it's
there.
Okay, it's hiding in front of me. Okay, so the title says shaping a simple core document. We used is a wrong term, the architecture document, because a lot of supply chain requirements from the use cases, for example, but also from participants, regular meetings, put a lot of items into the document. And it became clunky. So we call this a kitchen sink. So we were cleaning up that kitchen sink. And while doing so, the whole kitchen became a little bit messy and all the furniture had to be replaced. So that was a reason why a lot of the document other parts, while the issues by itself were relatively simple, had a lot of cross relationships. And this is just an example. And I want to highlight that the term clarify is an euphemism. We restructured. And some of this is clarification, and some was this is a work in progress. So first of all, that was already Ori's comment. We ripped out the core concept of receipts, how they look like, and the work in progress title for that is Cozy Receipts. And you will see how the title ends up. But in principle, it's the core. And the more important thing is it can be profiled through what we use as a SCITT receipt. The reusability of the receipt concept is so general that for verifiable data structure, it definitely belongs in Cozy. And the important part here is that we profile it. And with profiling, we mean both adding constraints to it as well as augment it with more semantics. I personally don't think that is what profiling is, but I've been educated in the IETF, this is profiling. So that is what we're doing with the receipt. So now the SCITT architecture profiles that Cozy receipt. I want to say that's a working prototype. And then we had some other things here. So this is just an eclectic list of items we've been working on. And I think one of the items is that the transparency service, it's defined by the architecture document, is of course giving you back a receipt, but we want to do this at scale. And imagine very large supply chains. Even if we work with Cozy and small message types, there might be some asynchronicity, async operations here, because you might put thousands of those in there. And the receipts you get might not be coming immediately with the first signed statement you put in the transparency service. That's some behavior that's important for scalability. It's also a feature that has to be highlighted so not to artificially constrain implementation design. And this is the most important thing because SCITT is supposed to work with various application designs and systems above, like making use of semantics that, for example, go into statement transparency. So then you understand as a service what the statements mean to some extent. That's not the job of the SCITT working group's architecture, but we of course have to think ahead and make that possible, so that a strong operation part is, for example, one output of that. Terminology simplification is also a euphemism. So we removed the consumer concept because in supply chain, it means something else than in an architecture in the IETF. So that is gone. We have a relying party now. That makes a little more sense. I think it's well defined. We have verifiers that are not defined but used. So all of this is like in a different state of being implemented in the document. The simplification that is happening there is basically based on a lot of consensus calls and trying to assess what is really the best terms here to not confuse people. And again, profiling the architecture document itself can be profiled for other things, and then not to conflict with other terms coming from other supply chain domains. I think that's the most important part. There's a mic in a queue. I have time for questions, I hope. I'm already using up 3 minutes.
I was going to wait a moment until you got to the end, but just a quick question. I think this is the case, but I wanted to confirm with the terminology simplification, especially with things like verifiers and relying parties. Is that aligning with NIST definitions and things like that we see elsewhere in similar related types of role definitions? Because this is something that's caused a lot of confusion for folks in the past in other working groups, where we use a term that has a definition elsewhere that's broadly adopted and used. What's your sense of that?
No. So what we do here is qualify terms. We must, if there are so many words, I mean, we can't just make things up. We could call it a glue bar, but we're not doing that. So it's a verifier, and we have to qualify that and prefix it to some extent. Or maybe go with the terminology section that, hey, look, we know there's something here. In rats, it's something else. Here it means this. Relying parties in general are relatively well defined. So I think that is something we do not have to touch. Consumer was so contentious, that's out. It's just, you know, all over the supply chain, and even in the internet protocol domain, it's just not a good word term. Justin.
Justin Richer. Naming things is hard. And coming up with terms is difficult, especially in an architecture space. You're doing the correct thing in terms of like qualifying it, like as used in here, this word means this, which is what we do in the NIST documents and what I told the W3C on this very topic. Because we, in NIST 863, we do use verifier to mean a very different thing from what's used here. But it's still a thing that verifies. And so in both cases, it makes sense to call that role verifier. Yeah. And we're never going to get away with away from these clashes universally. So I encourage you to continue with the qualified usage. Something that has been helpful in other spaces is to call out other known common usages in an appendix or something like that. Like, hey, by the way, this term is sometimes also known as this, and sometimes you hear this word and it means something else over there. Just to disambiguate.
Yes, that is an excellent suggestion. I think we are on that route actually. There's a napkin note called an issue tracker, so where we try to keep track of those things. But thank you. It's exactly that problem. It's not as bad as attestation. Oh, well, assertion is a claim, the ITUT says. So go to OAuth or whatever and complain there. And so sorry, no, it's really bad. But so really, qualification also can lead to weird terms. If you have to like prefix it with 5 other terms, that doesn't work. So then the what Justin just said, the terminology section becomes very important, and the appendices to clarify what the history of this mess was also. Okay, I'm losing up time. X509. So we started with another identity concept which should be a gateway function to I want to say identity document agility, and that was a distributed identifier. But well, the document we would have to rely on from W3C is not as useful as we thought, so we will do the continuous work that is done in the IETF, especially coming from the causing working group and referring to X449 continuum, which is actually a good thing because a lot of the supply chain people really understand their PKIX and are a little bit less afraid to change something they have not used before. The installation of the append-only log, I just gloss over. It's very important to understand how to set a verified data structure up. In this case, it has to do with some rules. Some steps have to be conducted before other steps. I'm not going into details here. We redefined the auditor role, had a very big, important spotlight on it in the architecture. It's yet another relying party that has special meaning, and so we will continue to work on that. The clarification of feed and subject is an ongoing topic, in my opinion. So again, clarification might to some people mean different things, but it's something we basically have been told by Steve and Ori already, that is about understanding the opaque content that is worked with here. And so because we can't do the scope creep of it, looking into the actual statement, the subject and feed are important here. Ori.
Since you mentioned the feed and subject is an ongoing discussion, I just wanted to kind of come to the mic and state, opinion on like why it keeps being an ongoing discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So, in our signed statements, we have issuer and subject, and the subject identifier in signed artifacts like CWTs or JWTs is always like, the subject identifier is from the position and opinion of the issuer. The issuer defines and selects the identifier they want to use for the subject. The subject is not a global identifier in those systems. It's a issuer specific identifier. It's chosen by the issuer. This has been a continuous problem because we often want to talk about this software vendor or software partner over here are both talking about the same software artifact, but they're distinct issuers. They're using the same subject. And that's what's led to the feed conversation being challenging. And if folks in the room have experience on this particular issuer subject relation or finding many signed artifacts all about the same subject, but from multiple issuers, and you could help bring clarity and resolution to this feed thing so that it stops being an ongoing conversation, I would very much welcome your comments on the list or, at any time, basically.
Excellent. I have a comment right now. I think that feed is a structure that is going into the application of SCITT, not the architecture itself. You can construct something like a feed. You could use an atom feed and create it from the data available in shooting from the hip here, from the data available in the SCITT defined structures. So it might be an application layer definition. So it might be a protocol specification based on SCITT, and maybe we move it there. Justin
Richer. So without comment specifically on feed as a structure or where this thing belongs, this is a topic that's been brought up in many different spaces. The fact that issuer and subject need to be paired many different times, and there's a bunch of things that you can cite. NIST 863C is a good one. That's what we did with the GNAP protocol, is just say NIST said it was like this, so do it this way. But there's others out there. This is not a unique problem to this space.
Yeah, I think the pairing of that is not contentious anymore. I guess the pairing of subject and issuer is something that is now mandatory, as you might have seen in the CDDL. So that's happened. Still, feeds are a little bit more frosting to the problem, and I think that frosting might be a different document. Hi, Mike.
Mike Perrock. I noted this in the chat, but I think kind of concurring with you that maybe this is a application layer or secondary build on. I think from a not blocking architecture, and let's make sure we get the core architecture out, it might be good because there's weird stuff involved in feeds. If that could be handled as a separate document, that would certainly simplify advancing the architecture to the point where we could start to test it a little better in production. So
And then there's a cool trick that we have a use case document we might never publish, but we could also derive very concise use case examples from them, and they might mention feed, and then we go from there. So there are many ways. I'm not worried. It's just work we still have to do. So it's not entirely clarified. We deferred federation because I'm using way too much time here right now. AJ.
Hello, AJ, supply chain consumption enthusiast. What do you mean the use case document that's not going to get published?
It's undecided. It a little bit depends on chairs and AD opinion if it's worth the while. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there, and it might get hidden away if you just let it expire.
Okay.
So that's a good idea, or it's a bad idea? Okay. I mean, I can hear both.
I just heard you say it, and I understand it now. And without having formed an opinion and thinking that's weird, I'm going to say, okay, and I'm going to go.
Yeah, well, this is okay. This is not up to us. The working group itself, the members can have an opinion, but we have to get at least consensus in the working group, and then permission. Actually, I guess. Right.
So speaking as chair, there's questionable value to publishing use case documents, their longevity, what they are for information, kind of ongoing. However, you can extract bits of use case and use them as introduction type material into following documents if you want it to explain motivations for particular design choices in other work. But a use case document itself, the community questions the long-term value of kind of staying that, putting that as an RFC. On the other hand, it will live on as a, expired document within the working group. It can still be found.
Ari?
So I concur with our chair. And also, we did run a working group last call on that use cases document before. So just from a sort of process perspective, I don't recall what exactly the conclusion was for that, but perhaps we want to update the milestones or make it clear what the working group intention is on the document. My understanding of the conclusion of the working group last call was that we wanted to settle the architecture and scrappy pieces so that if we were to publish the document, it wouldn't immediately become inconsistent with the architecture as a whole. So that's, I think, why we didn't say we're done, working group last call, finished. Yeah. But I don't remember exactly what the conclusion was.
So the document has to live longer before anything is decided than the architecture is true. Still, I think it's viable to highlight that doing an eclectic selection and a compression of some of the use cases as an introduction to the architecture is useful. I've seen that before. It works pretty well, and it would be a place for the feed discussion. Sorry. Oh, John, hi. Sorry, didn't see that.
Hey, yeah, just to confirm, I do remember what the outcome was of that last call, and it was substantially, as you said, Ori. So the most substantial comments on it were that it was waiting for things in the architecture to settle down. So let's try and fix that first, and we put it on ice.
Okay, now I'm really fast now. We deferred federation. Federation means things working together. It's kind of based on the receipt stuff we want to build. I think it's working out, but it's not for now. It will be an additional document to the architecture. Remote statement signing currently is in, because that is something that really connects with supply chain enthusiasts that want to use building blocks like SCITT. It's very, you can really see the use. Does it belong here? Okay, so these are the last two items. I've taken up too much time already, but we did a ton of work, and the core document literally looks like a core document now. There was some contentiousness about stripping so much out, but the general understanding it is not gone. It will just go to adjacent documents that have specific purposes, and that's basically my final statement here. I had 5 minutes, I guess. This was not 5 minutes. Okay. Any questions? I mean, we had some, but you can put them on the list or can join our continuous meetings. They're fun. Sometimes we are really talking about the same thing again and again, but it becomes better. So I will hand over to John. That's easy. He doesn't need a clicker.
I'll need a remote clicker in the form of Chris, I think. Thanks, Henk. And by the way, you got in the second round of the agenda. You had 10 minutes, so you're all good. Great. So thanks for the slide. So just quickly, for anybody who doesn't know or remember what is Scrappy and why, it was always part of the original charter and workgroup outputs statements that we would make a sample API. And I think it's always been understood and written down, as Ori said, that this isn't the standard that thou must do, but rather an example of an interoperable way of interacting with these services. And really the real purpose of it from a charter point of view is to enable interoperability and make sure that we can have sort of common test cases and common ways of people interacting with these things in order to create the artifacts that are normative and core to us in the form of the statements and receipts and so on. But as a nice side effect, there's nothing better to go along with your rough consensus than some running code and sorting out the fine edges of what's in scope for the core and what's an adjacent service, what's an application layer principle. Is there a difference between feed and subject, for example, which I assert that there is. We can sort all those things out. So that's why we're doing that. So slide, please. What does it do? It's defining HTTP APIs, so RESTful-ish, in fact, very RESTful, for things like posting signed statements, getting receipts, getting signed statements, and so on. So this is a kind of content slide. I'll go into detail next. So slide, please. So, and forgive me, I appreciate there's a accessibility problem with putting images of text in a slide, but of course everything's in glorious ASCII in the main documents if you want to read or download those. This made it easier for me. So there are only 2 mandatory endpoints so far. You know, it's an early document. But the only 2 are an unauthenticated attempt to get the transparency configuration, so the transparency service configuration, which helps with some of the discussion we've had with registration policies, which was a big deal for the last 2 IETFs, and understanding easy, interoperable, simple ways of things like getting necessary public keys and capabilities and all that sort of thing. So a way of interrogating a service and seeing if it's right for you. And the other one, of course, is the ability to register a statement, because that's essentially the most fundamental thing that that SCITT does. So that's it for the main thing. For those of you who've been following on from the very beginning, this kind of looks very similar and kind of looks very different from what we had originally in the appendix of the architecture document, and then what was implemented in the emulator that's in GitHub. But the entries, terminology, and so on, that's all the same. And the principle of having long-running asynchronous operations, that's all the same. So if you've been following along up to this point, some of those sort of core principles are very familiar and remain. And we've just updated things to match the new clarifications, as Henk put it, in the architecture. So slide, please. So this is an important one to bring out that I think people might be very interested in. So something that Steve has mentioned, but I will re-mention, is that there's a very important principle in SCITT of not really trusting anybody as far as you have to. And that includes the transparency service, and that includes the transparency service potentially now or potentially in the future. And so issuer statements are signed by the issuer before they go into the transparency log. And part of that allows you to identify them and see who it's coming from and check whether they're actually allowed to make statements. But it also has a very strong property that it prevents the transparency service from forging statements on behalf of other people. So we've got a nice kind of zero trust thing where there's a key at one end that signs the issuer, there's a key at the other end that notarizes. The two things together give you a very strong sense that this thing definitely existed and was stamped. Now, we've actually had, I won't spoil the hackathon section, but some of the experience of the hackathon and other stuff is that it's difficult for some people in some cases to organize that signing on the client end. And so we're proposing an optional endpoint that would actually allow the transparency service to sign kind of on the way through on behalf of an issuer, which has many benefits from a sort of convenience point of view, but of course adjusts the security and trust calculus a little bit. Ori, are you still in the queue?
He just dropped. He was answering a message in chat.
Okay, great. So that's an interesting thing, and I think that'll be a great thing to get comments on, whether we want to have that kind of convenience. I think it's a great idea, but yeah, it does come with interesting calculus. So slide, please. So then there's a bunch of options for statement resolution. Again, these are seeking to answer a number of the very frequently asked questions or frequently made comments in our working group meetings about the role of a transparency service being able to find or retrieve or search for the statements that have been made and registered. So at its very raw heart, all that you really need to do with SCITT is to get a receipt and stash it somewhere next to your artifact, and that's enough. But of course, as soon as you have supply chains of related parties and people interested in this kind of stuff, then actually you want to be able to find them. So these are a variety of things to support that sort of searchability and retrieval of statements that have been made either by yourself, by the issuer, or indeed stuff that you're trying to verify yourself. Slide, please. And then a couple of identity management ones. Ori's just put in the chat for those who are able to watch the chat at the same time. A little note about this, but there are two optional endpoints as well to help you resolve issuers, work out who you're talking to, and there are a variety of good reasons for that. Ori, you're in the queue, so I'll let you up.
Yeah, so this one I will come to the mic to say something about. In the SpiceBoff, we talked about an endpoint for discovering issuer keys and issuer metadata and issuer capabilities. And this is an example of doing that for the transparency service as a service provider, discovering the service's keys, the service's capabilities, those kinds of details. And I think in SpiceBoff, I mentioned OAuth already has ways of doing this for their credential use cases. So for discovering an OAuth SD JWT VC, they have a set of metadata endpoints that look pretty much exactly like this, but only for OAuth SD JWT. So I'm just calling out, if this looks terrible to you, we didn't invent it. We're trying to align with what folks within the IETF are doing on this front. And, one of the key important differences between what SCITT is doing and what OAuth is doing and what SPICE is doing is that SCITT has an opinion on format for signed statements. We do cozy here. So we need to be able to discover keys that can verify cozy signed statements and cozy receipts. We don't necessarily need to only represent keys in COSI. You're looking at JSON. So it's a important topic. We want to get it right. We need to collaborate with the experts in the working groups that understand how to do this key discovery stuff to make it possible to verify signed statements and receipts, regardless of which key material or in what trusted hardware you put that key material and how did you export keys and all of that other stuff. Thanks.
Great, thanks. Yeah, it's very important thing for us to be able to do, clearly, to evaluate these statements and demonstrate that they've been evaluated 2 or 3 or 4 steps down a complex supply chain, which is great. And the last slide, please, Chair, just to bring us in. So there is also issue a DID resolution endpoint. Those of you, again, who've been around for a while will remember there was quite a heavy use of DIDs early on, and indeed a couple of generations of hackathon entries have made use of DID resolution and so on. This endpoint is currently listed marked as deprecated in favor of some of the other stuff that we've done, and of course, because if you want to persist with this, it can be done in other ways. It can be done out of band. It doesn't necessarily need an endpoint in the transparency service. So better to do it in the consistent way that Ori's just mentioned at the mic. So this is still here. How long it will remain will be in part up to reviewers and authors as we go forward. But currently plan to not be there for very long. So that's kind of it. That's a whistle-stop tour through what's there. Clearly, there's lots more. Oh, Henk's coming up. So as Henk approaches the mic, clearly there's lots more in there and lots more detail. And we've got all of the example return codes and everything else. But I just want to give you a flavour of the coverage and encourage everybody to start reviewing and participating. Henk.
Yeah, hi, this is Henk. As a tip to the top hat to the HTTP dear, thank you for early reviewing API content in our documents. That's really great. Thank you. There in specific here, there is now standard 97, and I heard the term endpoint like 150 times in this dialogue, and it is deprecated. And maybe we should use the term resource now. That's just because they really made an effort and came to us, and that was nice. And so the very it's like certification chain, certificate chain. Sorry, that's a certification path today, and API endpoints probably are now API resources. So that's just the nit, but it will never change if we not think about it. So that's why I'm quickly bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks, Hank. On both points, actually, yeah, it was a really good review from HTTP. Positive as well in most parts, with some good feedback for us to implement. So that's promising. So just a couple of 2 more slides left, much more administrative stuff. So obviously we created Scrappy by removing it from an index. It didn't really belong in the architecture. So version 0 was really just a cut and paste from an appendix from the architecture document. But 01 is a much more consciously updated version. So this is the one that we want to start working around. And there's the link. And if we get the one more slide, please. The earlier we get review, the better. So anybody who's interested, please raise your hand or make a sound or put something in the chat, or indeed just come back to us later on. But Thomas?
I was raising my hand.
Oh, Thomas has left the queue. AJ?
I was just raising my hand to say I'll review the things. I'll make a
Ah,
note in
fabulous.
the. As note taker, it's ironic. I should stop doing things. I'll also write that in the notes.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. So clearly,
Monty will
this is-
review too for the notes. Put in Monty's name.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Monty. And yeah, as has already been mentioned a couple of times, but we need to turn great ideas and specs into tests and working code. One of the other focus areas for this is to make sure that it actually does test interoperability of the core normative elements, in particular the cozy receipts. We are aware of a number of different formats already that may or may not be closer or further away from the cozy receipt spec as it is. So it'll be a really good tool to get us all aligned. Ori?
Thanks, Ori Steele. On the topic of test suites, wow, you have an awesome keyboard. On the topic of test suites, we have, I suppose, some Python code that we use to do emulation of early SCITT architecture sort of components, and that code is sort of done what code does. It's drifted away from the architecture a bit, and so one of the things that I wanted to ask folks in the room with experience on is we were thinking about doing a kind of a test suite for Scrappy that had some sort of ability for vendors to show conformance for their implementation against the Scrappy API, in particular to show of these optional endpoints, does anyone care about the deprecated one? It would be cool to see who uses what components within the resources that we have defined. And I'm not sure how the IETF likes to handle that kind of test suite process. So if folks have guidance that they would the way that they would like us to manage our test suite process for Scrappy, I'm very much interested in. I'm happy to write code and do whatever the group tells us to do on that front. I think we need to do that, or we're not going to have very much success with Scrappy.
So I'll let my ADs tell me that I'm wrong, but my understanding historically has been the way those kind of test suites get used is that after you advance a document on standards track, you do an interop. You then document that you did the interop, and you use that to provide evidence that there are multiple kind of working compatible implementations, and that then is used to kind of advance it from proposed standard towards standards track. But there's a whole bunch of people who probably even have more history in IETF who are going to, give alternate versions of possibilities here.
Michael Richardson, what you said is essentially correct. The other possibility is that you may do revise the document and throw away the things you didn't test. And you may just show up 2 years later and say to the ISG, please change the status of the document. Here's some evidence. It was perfect to begin with. But the thing that actually I was going to respond to, Ori, is that there's an increasing commonality of now actually publishing a second informational document with traces of protocols to things. So TLS has done this, Ad Hoc has done this. There's 3 or 4 other places where this has happened. And so you wind up with test vectors. I think that makes much more sense for key exchange protocols or key agreement protocols where you need that. But you can also include examples, fully worked out examples in your document, ideally with the private keys, or the throwaway private keys, so that everyone else can actually generate the same thing you did from the same algorithm and the same stuff. And I really encourage that you do that, because one of the problems that we have historically, we had back in 1997, we did like an Ike v1 interop test, and everyone who showed up for those meetings or those events got their stuff working. And the people that tried to implement 4 years later were like, huh? Because they couldn't get debugging out of other implementations to find out what they did wrong. And so I think that's the real value of having them is the people that weren't here today, but rather we're here in 3 or 4 years, and they're like, I got to implement this by next Saturday, and this makes it really good for them.
Yeah, in addition to what Chris said, which is an option, I organized a couple of interop events, and those are all sort of you're on your own from a sort of like there's no process in that sense from the IETF point of view. Like we created the interops and we met and tested. That costs a lot of time and resources to do that. In the OWASP group, some of the folks are here. We worked with another adjacent organization to actually pull off some or write some test suite, which costs obviously money, and someone has to maintain them. That's the tricky part. Writing it once is one story, but then maintaining it is a separate game. And so, but that's actually, I guess, what you really want. But that is not an IETF task. So you have to find some other venue to pony up the money to have people sort of continuously work on it, and that's a little bit of effort. So thinking about like where this could be taking place, or having automated test suites, and maybe there's something to learn from the test suites that were developed for OpenID Connect, and folks are here, so you could talk to them, look at the code, and so on. So that would the path I would go.
Thomas? Oh.
Hi, my name is Thomas Howe, and I'm working with the VCon working group. And the intersection between what we're doing with conversations and what you're doing here at SCITT is really hard to miss. So, for instance, the VCon, the virtual conversation, could be signed. We could be the statement that you sign, or you can take one of your documents and attach it to the conversation that we're representing. And one of the parts about that for at least my work, lots of reasons people use VCons, but the work that I'm doing is in AI and tracking people's conversations as they go in and out of scary things. So I just love this work. I think it's really a great intersection.
Hi, Roman Dinilio, a SCITT enthusiast and outgoing AT. If anyone else wants to say at the mic, say something at the mic, please come up. I just want to be last. I'm just going to pause here. All right, so AD was said kind of 3 times, and so that means we puff and appear in front of the mic. So I think the key question is, Hannes summed it up very well, which is we have almost infinite flexibility to do something here. There's official process, there's kind of unofficial process, but the process will flex to what the outcome that the working group wants. I think kind of the key question I would have for the working group would be, what is the durable artifact you want to see, and how durable do you want it to be? There is certainly sufficient precedent in a lot of working groups that motivates, you want to publish text vectors on the RFC stream? By all means. Do you want to do interops officially, unofficially, document those results? You can publish a document and not kind of publish. So I would advise kind of the working group to do whatever is the interoping, kind of support the implementation, do that, and also at the same time think about where do you want the results to go and how durable you need them to be, and the process will flex for you.
Great, thanks, Roman. That's yeah, lots of options. I think we could take most of those. So moving swiftly on, next section is also me, or at least it's starting with me. Slide, please. I just like to show these. I have a collection of them from the last 4 IETFs. So I hope you've all got your stickers. But slide for the content. I think this won't take too long. So I'm not sure what happened to the picture of the local hackers this time, but we always have a picture of our hackers. For me, as you can quite clearly see, I wasn't able to travel this time, but I was up all night in a rather cold Cambridge, fueled by alcohol-free beer and a rather skeptical-looking kitten. And AJ similarly on his second or third bottle of cold brew, cracking away at keeping this thing going. So we had a few different things to do. Again, a bit different from recent IETFs. We've normally had sort of one big target and really hammered on one thing together. This time we've done 4 slightly different things. So if we press the button, I'll do mine first and then hopefully hold over to others. So for mine, I'm very keen to make sure that Scrappy does its job and does it quickly, and that means defining the API. That means getting back to a position of having some good solid running code to prove we've done the right thing, and also making sure that it actually proves that the architecture is in a good shape and actually defines something that we like. So rather than writing code this time, I just wanted to make sure that we have proper official an easy ride on the official route, and there's lots and lots of rules about writing RFCs, and one of them is the 3552 about having a comprehensive and sort of consistent regular security consideration section. So I've done that over the weekend, and I think it's pretty decent. It's had a tick, and I think it's, if I saw the text message correctly, I think Ori's just merged it during this meeting. But yeah, starting as we mean to go on, filling in the official sections and making sure the security considerations are extremely clear for this thing is important. So that's what I did, and I think it's a useful thing. So you can take a look at that. That was me. So if you hit the slide, please. Is Corey? I see Corey, you're online. Are you able to step in and talk about this, or shall I do it? Oh, you're here. Excellent.
Let's see. Okay. Is this okay? All right. Yeah. So I'm Corey Bonnell from DigiCert. I was working a bit on the hackathon this weekend on integrating DigiCert's what we call the Software Trust Manager product. It's basically what we use for code signing. Users can store their private keys in the system. We generate code signing certificates usable for Authenticode and other code signing platforms. And we'd like to tie this into what we're developing here at SCITT. So the actual work of using, signing a SCITT statement with a private key being stored in a remote signing solution isn't terribly interesting. But what we did in the hackathon, I thought we had some really great discussion in terms of coming up with what exactly we want in the SCITT statements. How do we represent identity documents? So what we have a GitHub repository with the prototype implementation. What we have is we basically forked what DataTrails has for their SCITT action, tied in our signing solution into it. So what we have is the SCITT statement signing, and then submission of the signed statement to the DataTrails transparency service. So a lot of the discussion was around, as I mentioned before, the integration of SCITT with existing identity document types, namely X509 certificates. So initially, before I walked in the hackathon last week, I implemented X509 DIDs to represent the identity document, and that did not go over very well at the hackathon. So we discussed alternative approaches, namely that we would be using the X509 thumbprint in the protected header. This is basically the SHA-256 hash of the identity certificate, which would be the identity document. And then also, in the absence of other discovery mechanisms for the identity document, we wanted a way for the certificate chain to be readily available to clients. So what we did is we added the X5 chain, basically the identity certificate and the issuing CA certificate in the unprotected header. So what this does is, in the case where there is a way to retrieve this certification path from a transparency service or some other mechanism, this information can be stripped by the transparency service. It's just entirely unneeded data. But at the same time, having it in the unprotected header In the absence of such a service, provides the relying party the necessary information to validate the signature on the signed statement. So that was kind of the approach we took. We kind of made some opinionated choices on some of the values in the headers. For example, the key identifier is basically an opaque GUID. We could probably actually remove that since we have the X5 thumbprint. And the one notable difference from the guidance in version 6 of the architecture document is that the X5 chain is currently specified as within the protected header. As I said, we moved that out of the protected header. Technically not in alignment with the document, but it sounds like there's pretty good consensus that it probably should live in the unprotected header, and the draft should be updated accordingly. Yeah, so this is kind of the work we had. Again, tying it up with an existing remote signing service, not terribly interesting, but hopefully this provides a concrete example that we can build upon and kind of refine the various ideas floating around in terms of how we represent identity documents within SCITT statements. So, anyone have any questions? I don't know if no one's in the queue. So, it's.
Yeah, I didn't pay attention to the hackathon you were doing on the next table because I was busy doing this other stuff, which you then later trained. So the security model is, if I try to summarize it, is you have the developer presumably sitting on his machine, and then when he creates the statements which need to be signed, he somehow, how does he get those to your server where it's sort of delegated signing takes place? Like, how is that interaction going to happen in general?
Yeah, so right now the GitHub action currently has integration with the REST API for our signing service.
Okay, so the developer would use, well, that's part of that's what you did at the hackathon, but in that's presumably not what you want to do in going forward, right? Like in a real product, you probably want to do something different, right? Or is that really the sort of the end state you want to accomplish just with a better software quality?
Yeah, I think, at least in my mind, the analog there of, a CI/CD pipeline, generating the hash of the artifact that's being signed and sent to the service for signing is, that's already an approach that's well understood, and widely accepted. We were thinking that we would take that approach here. Okay. If there is alternate solutions, we can definitely discuss.
But there's no, you wouldn't have any sort of specific user developer involvement, like saying, okay, now you need to sort of demonstrate that you possess anything or you consent to anything. It's just, like I could include malware, like the CI/CD pipeline could happily include anything else, and it would just upload and sign it, and everything would be cool. Versus having a model where the developer actually sits there and says, now that's what I think is ready for pushing up to the log. Is that I'm wondering what the implications of the security model are with that delegated approach. That's something I'm trying to wrap my head around. I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, just as we have a moment, Hannes, can you go to the mic and say your name?
Yes. It's supposed to be the name that was shown on the screen. Hopefully, it wasn't shown. Hannes Czerwiennik.
You didn't enter the queue.
Roy Williams. This approach of delegated signing gets into protected rings of labs and so forth. The approach is being used well within Microsoft to say, hey, anything that exits our build clusters has to be signed, and so therefore the signed content goes up to a SCITT receipt to give it the extra part. But having to sign all content as you produce it is the only way to protect a lot of it. The delegation mechanisms and the boundaries, we have papers on how this is done, and Corey is part of that group that's talking about this. We can take that offline, Hannes, if you want to go that way.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about it through further, but I think the approach being taken here is, pretty well adopted throughout the industry.
Yeah, Steve Lasker. So I think, to Hannes, I think maybe that's what Roy was saying also, is during the build, whether it's CI/CD or other workflows, you're testing the software. You want to create an attestation that it's been tested and passed or failed, or that an SBOM was created. So that is the kind of thing you could, and you want to put an identity to it, but you don't want the key in the build system. So you can use remote signing services that create that identity, and then you're registering that statement, which is the SBOM, the attestation, the test report, whatever it might be.
Or Steele, basically what other folks have said, but I think the key thing to think about here when you use remote signing for build server artifacts is like Hannes, you were asking like what happens from a security perspective, like what's the threat model there? I'm going to compromise the remote signing API. I'm going to steal the signing capability, and then I'm going to impersonate signing from the build server. And the alternative version of that is I'm going to compromise the build server. I'm going to do signing locally on the compromised build server. And in both of those cases, like you're still ending with a signed artifact that's representing some supply chain scenario. It's just one of them I had to like break into your remote signing API, which maybe had like a whole bunch of other factors and other authentication and authorization schemes around it, versus the other one where it's like I had to get root on your Jenkins box, blah blah blah. Sorry for mentioning Jenkins. I just want to say, like, I've worked to secure like build servers with a number of different technologies over the years, and it's really important that I want to sort of almost push back on the emphasis on remote signing, because sometimes you're intending to co-locate your signing keys in a specific set of trusted hardware, and you really don't want to be calling out into the middle of nowhere, depending on your deployment model. So apologies for mentioning specific vendors, and I think remote signing is an important component in this, but it's not a universal solution to signing binaries generally in supply chains. It's appropriate for some use cases and completely inappropriate for others. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Ori says. I think the remote signing, that type of solution is great for smaller development shops. They don't necessarily have the expertise to run their own HSM and, maintain that. So having the ability to kind of delegate that responsibility to another provider provides a lot of security benefits. But then at the same time, a large organization that does have the maturity to manage their own keys, there's definitely flexibility there to just use a local signing solution. So, all right, I think that's it, unless there's anything else. All right, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Corey. It's, yeah, as everyone said, it's a great option to have. For some people, it's the right answer. And it kind of proves the point that what we've done so far in SCITT kind of works. Good. Ray, yeah, there we go. Ray's coming. Excellent.
Clickers there if you want advanced slides.
No, I've got just this one slide. Hello, my name is Ray Lutz. I'm with Citizens Oversight, and I'm focused on the election and integrity area. And of course, they have software systems like any other software is going to fit nicely within the paradigm that's being used in SCITT so far. But also there's an opportunity to secure the data of the elections. And trying to get every single election secured is any step that we can take forward will be a step that will benefit us, because they're doing nothing right now. So step one, as I see it, is to, kind of forgot what I said here.
There's a monitor right there.
Oh, here's the monitor. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're trying to get jurisdictions on board, and by jurisdiction, I usually mean counties. And in the United States, there's about 4,500 counties. The goal is to get the data that they're currently producing to be produce a hash manifest file of all of the different files that are included, and a hash for each file, and then get a hash of that, and that's what's submitted into SCITT, just to do that. Of course, there's the little thin layer that we need that's kind of missing perhaps, which is that they need to also have a certificate that they can then sign it with. I don't know how far away they are from having that normally in these jurisdictions, but I anticipate that in many of them, they'll be just as far away as so many other people are of just having a certificate ready. So we'll have to have a thin layer there to accomplish that. And my real goal here is this level 2, which is to actually secure every single ballot image that's created and scanned and have the private key within the scanner sign that, and then be able to follow all of those images back to that original private key through the signing process. Now, in this area, there's been the question that's been kind of tossed around, and I've been a little bit researching with Hackathon. And of course, if anybody has opinions on these things, I'm happy to really have your involvement and understand what you might have to suggest. But is how to exactly get those private keys back, the public keys from all the different scanners. These are air gapped. It has to be through thumb drives, and a process that is a very minimal one turnaround. You know, we send a thumb drive, it comes back, and I have the private, the public key of that scanner that then can be published before the election, submitted to SCITT, and then we have all of the public keys of all the scanners, which then we can relate to what they've signed when it comes back. And at the end of the day, my hope is that because we produce ballot image auditing solutions, we can take all of the ballot images, and then we can avoid the question of, are the ballot images actually the ones that were created by the scanners? Of course, there's many other questions about whether the ballots that were scanned were correct and whether the voters were correct, et cetera, et cetera. But those questions aside, because that's kind of out of scope. But the goal is to create really enticing technology that will be easily adopted by these jurisdictions and accomplish change. I guess that's it for my overview.
Questions?
Hi, Roman Janillo, your AD Emeritus. Just as a public service announcement, I am thrilled that there's excitement about SCITT in a lot of different applications, but I'll repeat what I often say at every meeting, that the charter very narrowly scopes us to software supply chain.
And as your current AD, I will say the same thing.
Okay, thank you very much.
So, John, you want to walk through this?
Okay,
or you want me? Go ahead.
I don't mind. You can take it if you like.
You're probably more familiar with it, but
Okay.
I do have some thoughts on the last call.
Good. Well, okay. So we'll leave that for last then. So, yeah, just a quick summary. This is much for the benefit of the tape and people who are downloading the materials as being in the room, really. But just to remind people, the use cases document, which contains a lot of useful information, but probably won't ever become an RFC, as we've just discussed today, live in the place where the link is. The architecture lives in that place where the link is, currently on draft 06, which is the fruits of all that immense hard work that Henk represented earlier, and very great thanks to the effort. It is hours of very concerted effort from the authors that's gone into that. So it's really a really big improvement over last time. And then the next focus, as we've already highlighted, is to get on with Scrappy and make it prove the things it's supposed to prove. So it's a good opportunity to hold over to Chris. We are hoping to focus on Scrappy in no small part because we expect the architecture to go to last call and kind of be done now. But we noticed there are already a couple of issues have been opened just in the last week, so we'll need to think a little bit more about that. Chris?
So, yeah, actually, so on that, exactly on that topic, I guess we're anticipating an 07 in the. So, can the authors provide what they think as a rough time frame, such that they might have one in mind? And if they don't, that's okay too. 2 weeks to an 07 or something to that effect. Okay. So I'm willing to start the last call on the list with an 07, but I'd also like to get some reviews. Hannes, you're willing to review? Yeah, architecture. So I'd like to get some kind of reviews on the list. We'll note that Hannes was willing to provide at least one of the reviews. I'm looking for other folks in the room who might be willing to provide that. If you guys could send a note to either chat or the list to do that, that'll let us kind of great, so that we can kind of do that. And that's really the kind of conversation I wanted to have. I mean, obviously, we're not quite there yet. And also, I will note, I like to coordinate with the COSE chairs and just to try and figure out what the, because we have a normative reference to a document that's hopefully going to last call there as well. So we can still do our last call and advance it, but it may block publication until that document, and I just want to make sure we're aligned with them. If anything happens that either of the documents go off the rails, not to create kind of future problems. All right.
Hank's in the queue.
Yeah, this is Hank Open Mic, or to the next topic, doesn't really matter. I just want to mention that there is Easter holiday soon. So whatever you say is happening in 2 weeks, it probably will be Easter egg hunt and my kids. So yeah, so just add one Easter holiday to the time frame, and I'm more comfortable with anything we just said. Sure. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that'll, and I'll be monitoring, working with the authors and kind of monitoring list, but we will put out a call for some reviews, et cetera, and start that last call when that document update is available. Anyone else? This is your time. If you haven't spoken at the mic, you want to get your picture and your name in the notes.
AJ's up again, I think.
I was on mute. Sorry, I was making a joke. I said, for the record, I raised my hand, Chris, before you talked about being self-serving, and I've been in the notes in this meeting, countless others, to be self-serving before it was asked of me. One of the things that has come up is there are adjacent efforts that are not exactly in the IETF but seem increasingly important. I'm not really sure what to ask of the group or how it could be conceived, but it seems important that we look at people that are working on the older IETF RFC version of certificate transparency systems and this new emerging thing that has a name, I believe, called light logs. Not so much to say whether it's good or bad, but to compare and contrast the architecture to see how divergent it is from SCITT and whether there is value there. I know some people had talked about that in one-on-one meetings. I don't really know how that would work in the context of draft or specification work, but I think it's something worth calling out and doing, and I just want to put it out there.
AJ, before you get off, is that at another SDO?
It's not even an SDO. It's actually people that are part of a group called Ori is probably going to compliment this comment. Ori, not if I can shut up now and you're going to take it away. Okay, Ori will explain. I've got my name on record and I'm done.
Thanks. I did try and raise my hand in the queue. Ori Steele. there's a number of technologies that have evolved in the transparency space to provide a sort of substrate for transparency services for different verticals. So some of these tools are used for certificate transparency. Some of them are used for key transparency. We hope that many of them will be used for software supply chain transparency. And a lot of that community work is happening, under the general term of, open source transparency services or verifiable transparency logs. And I think I left at least one link to this work in chat, but there's a lot of open source work that's emerging, and some of it is directly compatible with the cozy receipts document that's creating the transparency log structure and sort of cozy infrastructure to enable other types of those open source projects to register their proof formats. It would be really, really awesome to see some interoperability at that receipt layer. So if you're an operator and you're running a transparency service, or you're compatible with certificate transparency 1 or 2, I know there's details there, and you're interested in doing interoperability testing with SCITT receipts, and you have a transparency log that you're already committed to, you're not moving off of it, I'm happy to chat about what that mapping might look like, and I can help sort of see if there's a way to get those pieces connected. And thank you to AJ for mentioning the extended open source community, which is a huge part of securing software supply chain. We've got to work together. So if you're using any of these tools, transparency log tools in the open source community, I'm always happy to chat. Thanks.
If any participants can do reach out and point folks to this group that, even if we're just kind of inviting them to hackathon or some kind of other way to collaborate, we would appreciate that. Generally, the IETF takes onus on coordinating between other SDOs, but we obviously don't take responsibility to coordinate to people who submit random code to GitHub. We're happy to have kind of more coordination, but you folks have to be willing to participate. We're a volunteer organization. So, thanks for that update, but we don't necessarily organizationally have a solution to that. Hank? As soon as you can get there.
Yeah. Okay, that hurts.
Go to the doctor, man. It's been a week.
In many ways. This is Hank. So in RATS, we started to incorporate some of the supply chain open source work, and it's early work, but it seems to be possible to find common ground if you talk and understand each other long enough. So we're explaining each other's concepts, and then we're like ping-ponging them. If that can happen here in SCITT, that's great. But there must be the time and the energy on both ends to do that. And for RATS, it took like a year to arrive at that point, that we found someone that is really interested and that has the time to explain things from the other side of this is about the reference integrity manifest stuff, and it is from the open source world, and they have semantics, and now we are working on integrating them. But the lesson learned here is that you need the right individuals that have the time. And in open source, if you're already a maintainer and doing the thing that you do, that is not necessarily the thing you can do too. So, yeah.
I'm happy to give everybody back 27, 26 minutes of their day. No other business.
The agenda was only exactly this long. So if we're done, then thanks very much.
Thanks, everybody. And see you in Vancouver or interim before that.
Amazing.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.